Matt Helmer's here in 1306 Elings Hall, and want to welcome everybody to the November Iowa Nutrient Research Center seminar. If you're tuning in for the first seminar, there are two others that have happened this fall. In September, Emily Zimmerman, and in October, Chris Jones. Dr. Emily Zimmerman from Iowa State University and Dr. Chris Jones from the University of Iowa. And today, I'm very happy to introduce one of the newer members of the Iowa State University faculty, but comes well known to many in the water quantity, and water quality area from his time at the University of Iowa. So Dr. Antonio Arenas is in our Department of Civil Construction and Environmental Engineering. Did I get that right? Okay, perfect. All right, perfect. CCEE. And he's going to talk to us today about a study of the Boone River watershed, linking an agroecosystems model with the process-based hydrologic model. One other reminder is the seminars have been recorded and are available on the Iowa Nutrient Research Center website. And also tune in the second. Oh, there's a significant echo. Okay. Hopefully when Antonio talks, we'll reduce that. So, oh, yeah, it might be because it was picking up on his mic. Okay. In December, Adina Howe will be talking the second Wednesday of the month. So hopefully folks can tune in for that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Arenas. And David, if you can let me know when he starts talking, if the echo goes down a little bit, that would be great.
So thank you, Matt. Thank you for the introduction. So hope everyone online can hear me. I want to start by thanking everyone here in the room. Appreciate you being here. And of course, everyone who is connected online as well. So did David say anything about echo? Okay.
The echo's gone. So.
Echo is gone. Okay. So thank you very much. So here we go. So as Matt said, I joined ISU. So I just completed my third month here at Iowa State. And I'm going to be talking about a work that was actually done when I was at the University of Iowa. And more specifically, I'm going to be talking about the master thesis that Adam Wise did, and Adam was co-advised by Professor Larry Weber and myself when I was over there. So I want to start by talking about what happens in Iowa when it rains. And to do that, I'm using this animation that hopefully all of you are seeing, all of you who are online are seeing, and it is not from the Boone watershed, but basically the same behavior we found basically all over the state of Iowa. You are looking at actually the Cedar River Basin. And for those of you who are familiar with Iowa's recent history, you may know that back in 2008, there was a significant flood event in that basin impacting the city of Cedar Rapids, which is, of course, the second largest city in the state. So this animation is not about that. It's not about 2008, but it's about 2016, actually the second half of September in 2016, when that basin had the second largest peak, only exceeded by that happened in 2008, right? So you are looking at accumulated precipitation on the left-hand side of the panel, and you are looking at 3 time series on the right-hand side, and all of them are observations. None of them comes from modeling. So our observations collected at a USGS station, a little bit upstream from Cedar Rapids at Palo. Okay, so black line shows flow. The blue line shows concentration, in-stream concentration measured at Palo. And I simply multiply those two lines, the black and the blue, to get the red. Okay, that's what it is. And the red represents the load. So we see that behavior in the state of Iowa. There are, maybe Matt, you maybe know better than me, but 60 or 70 sensors of this type, right? Some adding the ones maintained by USGS and the others with the funding from the Iowa Nutrient Research Center. We see the same behavior when precipitation happens. There is a dilution effect, concentration goes down, implying that water that makes it quickly to the stream, either via direct precipitation or quick runoff, has lower, in this case, nitrate concentrations than the water that is in the stream. Water is diluted, and then flows start going up, and then you see the load picking up. And actually, there is an interesting part where the black line is basically parallel to the red line, right? So the load is entirely dominated by flow. And then when the hydrograph goes down, the load starts going down, but even more slowly. So that's what happens in Boone and basically all over the state of Iowa. And the goal of this presentation that I have for you here today is to see if we can model that. So we want to have a modeling framework that is able to reproduce both the black line and the blue line. In our study area was Boone, but I decided to use this animation to kind of make the case. So, and at the University of Iowa, and I was part of that team, there is a team that has invested about 5 years developing a physics-based hydrologic model, right? So that's a model that we call GHOST, and we wanted to move or to include in that modeling framework the water quality component. So in the current version of GHOST, the hydrologic model developed at the University of Iowa, we have water quantity only. And this presentation and the results that you will see soon are the first attempt to add the water quality component to that modeling framework. So, and the question that we wanted to address is, can we simulate the effect of field or farm scale decisions on watershed scale water quality? That was basically the goal, without losing the progress that we made simulating flows. I mentioned these two names already, or this name actually, GHOST, the hydrologic model developed, physics-based hydrologic model. We searched literature and we found that AppSim, which is an agroecosystems model, was a good candidate for us to achieve the coupled simulation of water quantity and water quality. I know that AppSim is widely used in Iowa, by my colleagues here in many departments, and actually all over the world. It is a column model, and I will elaborate a little bit more about what I'm about to say, but we found some challenges in reconciling information from a column model with a watershed scale model. And here you have, you can get an idea about the model performance of the hydrologic model when it comes to matching observations. So that's what we decided to do. And before actually embarking into coupling those models, and you might have noticed that for the title of the presentation, we use the word linking as opposed to coupling. That's not a coincidence. So coupling, at least in my world, means something done at the source code level. So nothing of the sort, nothing like that was done. So this was just an exploration to see if this was a promising approach before spending time doing the code. Hopefully that makes sense. So and the first question is, so can it be done? Can we get good performance on the water quality side? We were happy with what we had as far as water quantity, and now we want to explore if by linking these two models, GHOST and AppSim, we can also have a model that has predictive capabilities on the water quality side at the watershed scale. And Adam's thesis also had these 3 secondary questions, basically the effect of cover crops and small grains on flooding, on water quality. And in addition to that, the last question was mostly about fertilizer application rates. So information of AppSim. So and to be honest, that's a model that I am less familiar with, especially if you compare that to GHOST. But as I said, so it's a column model developed by some folks in Australia, and I know that there's been a lot of participation from folks from all over the world, and faculty here on campus as well. I understand have collaborated in the development of these column models. So some information. There are many things. So having a hydrology only model, GHOST, there are many things that we like from AppSim. And there are, quite frankly, many things that we do not like from AppSim. So we were facing that issue of, okay, what do we take from AppSim and bring into GHOST? That was always the question. The stuff that we like a lot, because it's not present in GHOST, is the crop growth, right? So we have nothing of the sort. So, and we ended up taking information about crop growth from Apsim to drive evapotranspiration simulations into GHOST. In addition to that, we like a lot from Apsim the nutrient fluxes, right? They are not present in the hydrologic, in the physics-based hydrologic model. And quite frankly, we do not like a lot the water cycling because the GHOST model, as I presented before, it was developed or is being developed with the goal of being useful for flood-related studies, right? And this Apsim being a column model has no lateral flow whatsoever. So in my humble opinion, of course, it's not that useful when it comes to flooding, when it comes to analyzing flood events or predicting flood peaks in whatever stream you are analyzing, you need to have the lateral component, surface, groundwater, and tile as well. So that's what we were, and in addition to that, Apsim has a lot of flexibility as far as farm management, and that's also a plus or a strength of the Apsim model. So quick information, so it's just 1D, everything happens in a column, and quite frankly, from my watershed modeler perspective, that was a little bit, I had a little bit of difficulty reconciling what happened to the water by thinking just in 1D in the vertical direction. But that's how they do it. It has the flow in the vertical direction is simulated using the Richards equation that collapses, of course, to Darcy's equation when you have fully saturated conditions. There is a tile drainage component as well. And even though we ended up using those data, we found that at least in the way we set up, or Adam set up the simulations, the tile drainage simulations or outputs from Apsim were really episodic. So it went to whatever value it was predicted as far as tile flow, and it went back down to zero relatively quickly. So that was a little bit of an issue, especially because, as I said before, our goal was to think about the entire watershed. So, there might be, it might be that, a couple of tiles in a large watershed go to have no flow, but perhaps others are having some flow. And since the goal is to simulate watershed scale water quality, that was a little bit of an issue that we ended up solving with linear interpolation. So as I said, we ended up taking information about crop growth from Apsim and information about concentrations. And the goal, and I should have said that, the goal of this study was on the nitrogen part only. So it has, this is the strength, at least from our standpoint, from our hydrology standpoint, and it has the soil and nitrogen module, and we extracted all the information that we needed to make predictions about watershed water quality from this particular column model. So tile drainage is predicted in Apsim, and the concentration, the nitrate concentration, is also predicted as well. And we took that. It's also groundwater, how much water is moving, away from the column, is also predicted in Apsim with a concentration as well. So we took those values. A couple of words about GHOST. So this is, to be frank, the part that I'm more familiar with here in the presentation. It is a physics-based watershed model developed at the University of Iowa that is based for surface flows on Saint-Venant equation. So to be more precise, the diffusive way approximation of the Saint-Venant equation. So hydrodynamic routing, basically. So in a 2D fashion for overland flow, in a 1D fashion for streams. So flows in the saturated part are simulated using Darcy's simulation, Darcy's law simulation. For the unsaturated part, it has a very simple representation of the Richards equation, and everything is solved in a couple manner. So it's a surface subsurface model, and the way we ran these simulations and the way we typically use GHOST is by running continuous simulations. So we don't use, of course, if you have a continuous model, you can run event-based simulations as well. But the way we make analysis is by running multiple years, almost 2 decades in the case of this study. So all the fluxes are simulated by GHOST, and we have from GHOST information about basically every single hydrologic pathway that you can think of coming from the model, and is forced using precipitation data, potential evapotranspiration, and air temperature and relative humidity. Is based on a Voronoi or Thiessen polygon computational mesh, but you can see there, hopefully, in that pentagon in red. And the water table is simulated as a moving boundary. So within each one of the computational elements, you have the water table fluctuating as a response of ET or actual lateral movement in the groundwater. We also developed recently for GHOST a tile drainage component, right? And the flow that GHOST simulates to mimic the effect of tile drainage on the hydrology of Watershed is based largely on the location of that moving boundary, the water table. And if the water table, of course, is above the tile drainage, you have a certain amount of flow that is driven into the tile pipes and actually ultimately transported to the stream. So it's not only a spatially explicit simulation for tiles, so it does not rely on the modeler knowing the location of the tiles, but it's more like an aggregated fashion. So it basically is a tile module that has the capacity to remove water from the first column for the first meter of the soil column and transport it to the stream quickly. So and now about the study. So it's the Boone watersheds in north central Iowa. I suspect that many of the folks who are familiar with Iowa have worked on this watershed, or at least heard. I myself, I have never visited the watershed. It has one USGS station that we used extensively for model calibration and testing down at Webster City that captures basically the entire watershed. Interesting watershed because it has different landscapes in my mind. If you think about the upper part of the watershed, is fairly flat. This is a photo from Google Street View that shows kind of the typical landscape in the upper part. However, if you move downstream closer to the confluence of the Boone River and the Des Moines River, you start seeing more scenic landscape. And this second picture here is from someplace I think is below on a stream from Webster City. Dominated by, as you can see in the map there, dominated by row crops. So 85% of the entire watershed is either corn or soybeans, a little bit of pasture and forest, but and 7% developed based on these stats. But like I said, it's mostly corn or soybean. And roughly speaking, is 60%. It varies from one year to the other, but it's 60-40%, 60% being corn and 40% being beans. And it has an interesting characteristic, and actually the same applies for many places in Iowa. The same applies certainly for any other place in the Des Moines River watershed, and it is heavily tiled. So, and you are looking at a map of drainage districts, and there is no way, in my opinion, that you can capture anything about the hydrology of this watershed without accounting for the effect of tiles. And maybe getting a little bit ahead of myself, we calculated after running all the simulations for about two decades, I'm sorry, that on average, about 60 or 55% of the annual flow comes from tile, with a lot of variability from one year to the other. And here you have a view of GHOST's computational mesh. So as I said, it's based on Voronoi elements, that it is highly regular around the segments that we flag as streams, which are the blue lines in the figure. But away from the streams, we tend to use a regular square or rectangular, and that's looking for computational efficiency. And without getting too much into that, the whole code is based upon looping, right? For each one of the computational elements, looping around the neighbors. So we ended up settling on having squares away from the streams, trying to minimize the number of loops. So for this particular study, as I said before, we simulated 17 years of hydrology between 2002 and 2018 continuously. So we take the model, we hit run in January 1st, 2002, and we let it make predictions about flows, and as you see later on, about water quality as well in a continuous manner. So we are not stopping the model over the winter and resetting any parameters. So, and I'm emphasizing this because in my world, that is a very, very, very high bar to have a model that makes good predictions after running 17 years. So as far as the computational mesh, we have about 13 elements, and the average element area is 45 acres, right? So a typical question that I get when I present this type of slide is, can you use smaller elements? Yes, I can. However, the consequence of that, or the price that I will pay to go with a finer mesh, is computing time. It's always that trade-off. So the world of modeling, at least in this fashion, is a world of it's a trade-off between how resolved you want your mesh to be versus how much time you want to wait to have the results. It's always that balance. So, and I added here, or Adam added here, some numbers. So for this particular mesh to run 17 years, took about 2-3 days using HPC, the HPC high performance computer at the University of Iowa. So I'm a big, strong advocate of this type of modeling. I think it's the way to go. But if for whatever reason you are not willing to wait, a couple of days, it might not be the right approach. And in addition to that, it's not like how we make just one run. So we make a couple, right, for calibration. So I guess point that I'm making is that this type of modeling is time consuming. And the model, the hydrologic model, makes predictions at about 2,400 segments. So we can probe, interrogate the model at 2,400 basically locations along the streamline. So now a little bit about AppSim. So, and how we went about linking the two models. So as I said before, no coding was done here. So it was basically extracting parameters from one model and use that as input parameters for the other. And to be more specific, so the hydrology of Ghost was informed by these 4 variables: leaf area index, which is the dimensionless parameter that is typically used to simulate canopy cover, root depth, vegetation height, and crop coefficient. So 1 to 4 were taken from Apsim, ingested into Ghost, and those 4 parameters are the ones that drive ET in the hydrologic model, evapotranspiration. And later on, I will talk about the water quality data that we extracted from Apsim, and we using the hydrologic time series predicted by the hydrologic model. So here an example of one of the time series that was generated using data from Apsim that ended up making it to Ghost to simulate in this case the crop coefficient, which is basically a portion, if you want, of the potential evapotranspiration that it actually is transformed into actual evapotranspiration. So a lot of linear interpolations, and in addition to that, we were, or Adam was actually fortunate here because we had what I would describe as a very unique data set. So it was shared with us by our friends at the Iowa Geological Survey. And it was data collected at the tile drainage district level, data on flow and data on concentrations as well. I think it's 5-year data. And those data were collected in Lions Creek, which is one of the Hog 12s that flows into the Boone River at Webster City. So we used that to get an idea about Apsim's model performance. So, and this is one of the things that we didn't know and ended up turning into a calibration parameter was the fertilizer application rate. We had no data on that, at least not for the entire watershed. And Adam ended up following a simple trial and error process of changing the rates and see if he could mimic somehow concentrations observed at the tile drainage district level. And here I'm presenting some information extracted from Apsim and observed at the tile drainage district level. So some issues, especially early on in the year, and we ended up concluding that it was because we ran, and perhaps that was a little bit of a mistake that we made. We ended up concluding that Apsim doesn't have any winter processes. So snow, as far as we know at least, snow is not accumulated and frozen ground conditions are not included. In GOES they are, but in the Apsim model they are not. And whatever information about precipitation we ingested into the Apsim model for January and February was assumed to be liquid precipitation. So it was generating runoff and tile flows. And that was something that we should have taken care of by doing some calculations offline and do basically the snow accumulation and melting offline before giving precipitation information to Apsim. We kind of missed that part because in GOES, we do have those two winter processes included. So that was a little bit of a, I wouldn't say a mistake, but some mistake, I guess, that we made. So I talk about this, and now give you an idea about model performance. This is water quantity only, so basically GOES, the hydrologic model, and I'm showing the average of this 17 months. Remember that we ran simulations from 2002 to 2018, so 17 years. So I'm presenting here how the average of the 17 Januaries compares, the predicted value compares against observation, and so on for the from January to December. So that's something that we pay a lot of attention to. With typical months, I'm sorry, that gives us a hard time, being March. So the capturing from the hydrologic standpoint, the spring melt is not an easy task. And you might think that that's perhaps an important, and depending on the purpose of the model, right? So if you think about what happened fairly recently in 2019 in Western Iowa, that was a big flood event driven for the most part by winter processes. So depending on, like I said, the purpose of the model, you might be very interested in capturing the effect of snow melt, frozen ground conditions or not. So that is that as far as the monthly balance. This gives you an idea about the annual runoff. So same deal between 2002 and 2018, 17 years, how the predicted runoff expressed in millimeters compares against the observation. 2010 was a year, very wet year, that we had a lot of issues capturing, but overall good performance. And this is one of the the comparisons between the model and the observation that we paid, or folks at the University of Iowa pay a lot of attention to. And what you are looking at there is 17 dots that represent each one of the 17 maximum values for each one of the years that we simulated. So if you take 2002, for instance, within those 365 calendar days, you extract the maximum value for the observation, USGS at Webster City. You extract the maximum value for the GOES in this case, and you compare them. And a perfect model will have all those dots lining perfectly along the one-to-one line. And as I always say here, the perfect model, of course, doesn't exist. So, but you see, we have a coefficient of determination, an R-squared there of 0.92. And the highest value up there is for 2008, but good model performance as far as peak flow prediction, and that's something that the University of Iowa team values a lot. So an idea about how the predicted hydrograph compares against the observed hydrograph, in this case for 2008. You see here for the March window, a little bit of a under prediction that was reflected also when I presented the monthly values, but as far as the peak was captured very well for that particular year, 2008, the wettest year, I believe, in the window that we simulated, or at least one of the wettest. And this is one year that I personally like quite a bit, because it is the result of 17 or 16 years of simulation. So if GOES had, the way I see it at least, if GOES or the hydrologic model had any bias towards, losing mass or anything, it would be reflected here because this is the very, very last year of the entire window that we simulated. But we still see that, at least for that, you can see that the fall of that particular year was extremely wet. So you can see that there is also a skill in predicting flows from this model for this year. So, and where do we struggle? So, well, we struggle with the low flows. So those are the hardest flows to capture, at least for the GHOST modeling framework. And once again, depending on the purpose of your study, that might be an issue or that might not be an issue, right? So if you are a flood first kind of guy, so having the peaks, the annual peaks, the flood events very well captured in the model is something that, of course, you pay a lot of attention to, and perhaps you are not overly concerned about the low flows. If you are thinking about, I don't know, studying the impacts of drought on water quality, you need to work on that a little bit more. So 2012, for those of you who remember or who know about Iowa's hydrologic history, extremely dry year, and you see that GHOST over predicts, in this case, especially towards the end of the growing season, the flows. So commonly used metric when it comes to assess model performance, hydrologic model performance, is this NSC metric. And there are different values that you find in literature, but typically you want to be for the most part above 0.5, and if you are in the 0.6, 0.8 range, you are very happy, meaning that your model is capturing the behavior of the observations very well. And you see 2012 and other dry years with the GHOST model struggling a little bit. Average NSC for the 17 years that we simulated, 0.7, coefficient R squared, 0.72, and p-bias, which is mostly a metric to assess if the volume, is kind of the mass conservation parameter, is being over predicted or under predicted. So in this case, it's a little bit over. So how do we go about linking the two models? Well, so the simplest way that we could come up with was this. So we took information about water quantity from GHOST, we took information about water quality from Apsim, and we used a simple n-member mixing analysis or a mass conservation approach to merge those two data. And that's what you see in the equation there. So we have information from GHOST about surface runoff, how much water moves quickly overland flow to the stream. We have information about what is the contribution of groundwater to stream flow as well. And we also have information about how much tile flow is being predicted by GHOST that moves to the Boone River. Okay. And then we took data from Apsim after running kind of the same window. So concentrations for groundwater and concentration from tile. And the calibration target was what? The calibration target was the observation at the USGS station in Webster City. So we had for, I think it's 6 years, we had good data. I mean, for flow, we have plenty, but for water quality, for nitrate concentrations in Webster City, we have, I think it's 6 years of data, 2012 to 2017, I believe, what was available. So that was the calibration, and that's what you can see on the right-hand side, of the equation. So we can simulate using, once again, hydrologic time series from GHOST, concentration from Apsim. We can simulate the load at the Watershed scale using this simple n-member mixing analysis. What's simple, of course, it's simple, doesn't require any coding, but by following this path, we sacrificed entirely the spatially explicit nature of the GHOST model. So basically, we were simulating this entire watershed as being, or the flow observed and the water quality values observed at Webster City as simply the mixing from 3 tanks, right? Tank groundwater, tank tile, tank surface flow, and each one of the tanks had certain concentration. But I don't know, for instance, anything about the spatial distribution. So that's for future work. This is the first result that we got at an annual scale. And I'm presenting here, the black line presents the load predicted following the end-member mixing analysis that I talked about before. And the blue one is using the observation at the USGS station at Webster City. So you see the issue that I mentioned before about we having flows over predicted in 2012. It is reflected in the fact that the load, which is simply the product of the flow and the concentration, is over predicted as well. But for the other years, you see that there is also a good agreement between the observation and the model prediction, which is GOES plus Apsim plus end-member mixing analysis, at least at the annual scale. And in this world of modeling, everything is easier, perhaps not easier, but you can get good performance at the annual scale. The bar goes way up if you try to do something at the monthly scale, and it's way higher if you try to mimic whatever you are trying to simulate at the daily scale, and of course, let alone sub-daily or hourly. Okay, so this is annual, and this is monthly. So same information for the 6 years between 5 years between what is it? So March 2012 and 17. So time series predicted using the same methodology. A lot of struggle predicting the high peak in 2013. So one peak that, by the way, I understand that we are likely to see, in 2022 because of dry conditions. And you see also a little bit of a shifting in time. So the black line is a little bit shifted, and and Adam, actually, I didn't mention that. So Adam graduated from his master's here, so he's still at the University of Iowa working, and I'm still working with him in refining this. So this is what he defended for his master thesis, but we are making improvements on the results that you are looking at. So the shifting in timing, I'm blaming that on that issue about winter processes not being present in Apsim. So and concentrations being over predicted in the January-February window. But still, at the monthly scale, you see a decent level of agreement between the predicted value and the observed one. And I'm not showing here the daily, but I can be honest with you, so it doesn't look good. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't look good. So more work to do on that. So we are comfortable with the flows at daily or even sub-daily scales. We are not comfortable with the loads or anything finer than the monthly. Not now, at least. And this is a summary of how the different hydrologic pathways contributed to the load at the watershed scale. So you see that the dominant driver of the flow, at least based on the model prediction and the framework that I presented before, was the tile, and it's followed by surface waters and groundwater. So we kind of check the box. So there is a promising approach, but as I said, so more to do on that. So then Adam explored the effect of cover crops and small grains on flooding and on water quality as well. So he came up with this 3 rotations. So he added a winter wheat as cover crop in a standard corn and soybean rotation. So he also added a 3-year rotation with corn, beans, and oats and alfalfa, and a 4-year rotation with corn, beans, oats, alfalfa, and then after that alfalfa as well. And he basically replicated the same methodology to generate the parameters needed for GOES to run. And then he went back to 2002 with a new time series for crop coefficient, LEI, root depth, vegetation height, and rerun using the same forcing, the same rain, basically. And this is what he got. So he got that out of the 18 flood events, flood being defined as being above the 2-year flood, for the purposes of this study, out of the 18, he ended up having 9 after adding all those rotations. So the peaks were decreased, and a couple of them fell below the 2-year flood line. So this is what is being presented here. And there is a nice inset here. Yeah, this is for 2008. So he also calculated the flow reduction associated to each one of the rotations that he came up with for the peak of 2008. And he found that a reduction between 9% for this particular year, between 9% and 23%. So major reduction. So what about water quality? Same rotations. Well, so he calculated for the 6-year window for which we had baseline, which is 2012, 2017, I think. And according to the model results, so the GOES plus the rotations plus the end-member mixing analysis, so it's a simple approach. So each one of the rotations that he came up with would be able to achieve the goals of the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy, based at least on these preliminary results, without changing any fertilizer application at all. So the only thing that was changed was the water and, of course, the concentrations for each one of the end members. What about fertilizer? So, and I didn't give you the numbers, but here are presented. So the number that he ended up settling in as far as fertilizer applications was 190 pounds per acre for corn. And for beans, that would happen in the first half of the year. And then 50 pounds, kind of trying to simulate a manure application after beans. That was the best that he was able to find, at least for this methodology. And then he did a little bit of research on the recommended rates, research is from ISU, and he ended up running simulations, reducing that fertilizer application from the baseline, so the 190 plus 50, reducing that to 154. And he found out that by doing that alone, we would be able to get basically halfway through the goals of the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy. So just with the fertilizer reduction alone. And then he combined the fertilizer plus all the other rotations, and that's the load reduction that is presented there. And he also extracted from Apsim yields. So that's also very appealing from Apsim, that makes that prediction. And he found out that overall, the yields predicted by Apsim in comparison to the baseline didn't change much, with the exception perhaps of the of these corn, soybeans, and oats rotation that he came up with. But overall, some of the yields were basically indistinguishable from one year to the other. So, and those are for corn. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention. And hopefully it was interesting, and I will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Antonio. Hopefully folks can hear me online. And David, I'm sorry if there's an echo. Are there any questions from anybody in the room? I have some questions, but I'll try. We'll see if this works, Chris.
So why is the low flow so hard to measure, to model?
Very good question. So, and I'm gonna, the representation of GOEST, of the subsurface, is simple. So I said that GOEST is a physics-based hydrologic model, right? But that's a big umbrella term. So even with that big umbrella term, you can find models that meet that description, but that have a simple representation of the subsurface. And to be more specific, simple representation of the unsaturated part. So you can find models that represent flows in the unsaturated part in a 1D fashion only, or 3D. And there is a computational time to be paid by doing one or the other. So the representation in GOEST is simple. And I've always attributed the reason why GOEST struggles to capture the low flows, because the subsurface is simple.
Antonio, may I ask one question?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, it's a very, very interesting research, and thank you very much for the presentation. So if I understand this research correctly, you performed a one-way coupling between Apsim and GOEST, right? So the output of Apsim will be the input for GOEST. So do you think that the hydrologic simulation would also have impact on Apsim therefore you would want to consider a two-way coupling between these two models?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. So the question was about the coupling between the two models. Absolutely, absolutely. So I like to have the water cycling coming from Ghost, but that would require some coding being done, but without a doubt. So at this point, the results that I presented are based on a framework that is a little bit disconnected, if you want, because we have the water moving up and down and laterally in Ghost, and we have the water moving up and down only in Apsim, and there is not necessarily they are not reproducing the same dynamics. So that's certainly an area that we can address, but it will require, in my mind, the way I see it is kind of taking from Apsim and code that into the Ghost framework. So it's not a minor undertaking.
Yeah. That kind of gets at what my question was. Like, kind of, what are the immediate next steps with this work?
Well, different ways, different paths you can take. So one, I'm really interested in adding back the, as I said before, the spatially explicit nature. And for that, I think Ghost or any hydrologic model needs to have a solute transport routine, right? For us to be able to answer questions as, okay, 41%, let's say 41% of nutrient loading reduction. So what if I were to do something, plant the cover crops only in the 2-year floodplain or the 5-year floodplain? So will I get, a big chunk of that benefit just by doing that? So at this point, we cannot answer those questions. So I think a hydrologic model with a solute transport routine is needed for us to continue forward.
So that kind of gets at one of the questions I had was for those, like the mixture, the extended rotations. So when you put that that concentration, is that kind of the average concentration of that mix? It's not just for like it's not like it has corn in 2015 and then soybeans in 2016 and then so that would
a little of that.
Okay.
So it was done once again in a simple fashion. So what Adam was doing here, so he ran 2 Apsim simulations in parallel, right, with rotations staggered. So corn, soybeans, and beans, corn. And then he simply used whatever the land use data said for that year, let's say 60% corn and 40% beans, to calculate the average. So it is the average, but a little bit of the the actual land use was accounted for in a, like I said, in a simple fashion.
Any other questions in the room or online?
Yeah, Matt, I have a question. Antonio, can you?
There are not any in the chat that I'm seeing right now. Hopefully people can still hear me, but. No, okay.
Matt,
David,
can you hear me?
David, feel free to, just a second. Let me take unmute off. Just a second. Okay, if you want to go, David.
Oh, sure. So, Antonio, can you elaborate on how tile networks are incorporated into Ghost? I've done a fair amount of modeling with Geisha, which is a similar, spatially explicit watershed modeling platform that incorporates tiles as long linear features. Are they represented in a similar way in Ghost? It's kind of hard to do at large spatial scales like you have represented in your models here. So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so thank you, David. So the question was about tile drainage. So, and I am happen to be a little bit familiar with Geisha as well. So I know that Geisha has a tile drainage representation that I would call spatially explicit. It requires the drawing, as far as I remember, of the tile drainage pipe. So since the goal here at the University of Iowa was watershed scale simulations, we knew that that information is not available. It might be obtainable, I guess, from aerial photos, but it's not an easy task. So we came up with a simpler approach that is just a function of the location of the water table. And since I said, like I said during the presentation, we had a unique data set, and it was tile drainage district flow information. So we used that to calibrate the tile module in Ghost. So basically, if the location of the water table is 1 meter or closer to the surface of the ground, so some orifice equation is activated that drains water from the water table to the pipe and transported to the stream. So there is no need to know the location of the pipes. So yeah.
Yeah. So would can you tell like within your mesh, could you tell that if there was, say, an upland soil that likely isn't tile drained, that would you tell that there's no tile drainage there, but then downslope there could be a tile drain?
For this simulation, it was applied uniformly,
Okay.
but that capability exists. But for the results that I presented here are uniformly. So I don't know if I answered David's question or not.
Yeah, that, thank you, Antonio. I'd like to actually talk with you at some point about this a little further, so.
Okay. Thanks, David. He'll talk to you more.
Okay.
Any other questions online?
Yeah.
A second. Okay, here.
All right, so you said the Apsim is a column model that's an up and down movement of the system itself. Why Ghost actually gives room for lateral movement.
Yes. Correct.
Okay, so Apsim also has the runoff model and the erosion module. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So did you try this at all, or how do you think that works? Since
We to be honest, we didn't explore that part. So the question was about the runoff and soil erosion in Apsim. Yeah. So we did not explore that at all. So the emphasis was on nitrogen, and that's all we did. So I don't know, to be frank.
There was another question on any thoughts on how you might approach P losses. Might Ghost be a tool for addressing movement and routing of P, phosphorus?
Well, it's a tricky question. So there is a reason why we started with nitrogen. It moves to the water, right? So we haven't given much thought about that. I would imagine that some sort of sediment transport would be needed for that. So what I said about the need for a solute transport routine for P, I would imagine that some sort of sediment transport routine will be needed. But to be frank, so we haven't explored that much, or I haven't explored that much.
All right. Well, it's about 4 o'clock. So I want to thank Dr. Arenas for a really interesting presentation, and I think really important work that we look forward to hearing more about. So those of us in the room can give him a virtual round of applause, and online, we'll give him a real applause, excuse me. Online, they can do a virtual round of applause. So thank you, Antonio.
Thank you, Matt.
And thanks everybody for attending today.